Hey, good evening. In the last video I had y'all watch, I talked about principles of wall layouts when you're doing studs, trying to find where does that stud sit on the specific wall that you're building. Um, we talked about a blank wall section, which I'm going to demo building today. We also talked about building a wall with a door and a window in it, and the special requirements and considerations you have to have uh, when you're building a wall with a window and door in it. Uh, but tonight, what I want to go through is the process of laying out and constructing a basic wall. And once the wall is built and framed, I've got my floor frame behind me here. We're going to take it over here. We're going to stand it, place it, and brace it. And so we'll go through all those. Now, along the course of this video, I'm going to ask y'all 3 questions. Okay? So have your pen and paper handy. That way you can write down the answers, and when you're done, take a photo of it, submit that on Canvas. That's about the easiest way to do this. Remember, I'm only accepting handwritten work. If it's typed up, it's not as good. So handwritten work, take a photo, submit it in Canvas, and just follow along. So we've already talked about blank wall sections, what they are, how they're laid out. Now this is just going to, I'm going to go through that same process here, but instead of those whiteboards like I was using in the last video, I'm going to be using 2x4s. These are going to be my top and bottom plates. So really, you don't need a whole lot for this particular step, laying out the wall like I told you. You're going to need a tape measure, something to mark with. I'm using a marker. Hopefully it shows up better for y'all on the camera. But in real life, use pencil or a pen because it'll be more accurate than the wide mark that this marker ink lays down on. And you're going to need a speed square. When it comes into constructing the wall, you're going to need your fasteners and usually your hammer. I'm going to be using screws and drill tonight, but usually a hammer or a nail gun and your fasteners, and that will take care of it for you. So without further ado, let's roll up our sleeves and let's get into this. Okay. So first things with my plates here. These are 2x4s. Okay. They're cut to, they would be cut to the specific length of your wall. The other step you want to do before you actually start laying these out, and you do this with your plates and with all your studs, you want to check them. Make sure that they're a quality piece of lumber, because if they're warped, like if they bow in and bow out, crown up and down, or if they twist along the length of it and you're trying to put studs in between these two and this top board is really twisted, it's going to be hard to get everything matched up right. So take a look at your lumber. There's a couple considerations you want. If you can, anything that's really defective, cast it to the side. Put it to the side in what's called a cull pile, and you will usually be able to use that for small chunks of blocking and little pieces of bracing or just diagonal bracing throughout the process. So try to use the best lumber that you can. If you have some twisted stuff, it can work. But when you're setting up your walls, and remember this is in corners where 2 walls intersect, that is one of the places you want to have your straightest, least effective studs. Because if your corner where the 2 walls come up like this, if these 2 studs are twisted, you're going to be able to look down that and you're going to see it. Okay, so try to use your best lumber for your corner pieces. Also, your king studs. Your king studs should be nice and straight. That way your jack studs will be good, and when you set your door in there, you'll be all right. Now, you may notice that I have a couple of X's on the side here. This is one of the things that we look at when you check it for twisted. you want to see if there is a crown in the board. And that means when you look at it from end to end this way, does it rise and fall? Or does it fall and then rise back up? Is there any kind of change, or is it nice and straight? If it's nice and straight, you are good. But if there is a rise and fall, you want to make a note of that by placing an X on the high side of that. This is what's known as the crown. Now, some people will write a C. Some people will actually draw a little crown like would go on a king's head. But that just takes a lot of time. So I put an X. Boom, boom. Right? Now, why this is important is if I had one crown facing this way, another crown facing the opposite way, when we go to put the studs in, and you cover it up with drywall, those boards are twisted the opposite direction. You might see it in your drywall. Now, we'll also talk about that when it comes to the normal studs, but you want to make sure that these two crowns are marked. But here's the fun fact. When you lay them down, don't face them the same way. You want to roll them in opposite directions. So one facing away from you, one facing towards you. That way, when you stand them up, they're both going to be on the same side. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to stretch my tape, hook it on the end of the board, stretch it down here as far as it goes. I'm going to lock it in place. I'm going to be using 16-inch on-center stud pattern with this. And remember, we talked about it in the video. You find your 16 inches on center, all your 16s are marked out in red. And then I don't mark right on my 16, I have that offset. And if you guys can remember, that offset is half the thickness of your framing lumber. In our case, our framing lumber is 1.5 inches thick. So half of 1.5 inches is 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a mark at 16 3/4, and I'm going to put an X under the 16. Okay? And this means the center of my stud is going to be right on 16, hence the term 16 on center, 16 inches on center. 16 is my first layout. Second layout is 32. There's a big X there. Now I'll come back and I'm going to make these lines darker and bigger so you guys can see them better. The next one down is 48 3/4. All right, and last one here is 64 3/4. Now, again, my marks go at 16 3/4, 32 3/4, 48 3/4, and 64 3/4. X's go under 16, 32, 48, and 60. At this point in time, I can take my tape up, stick it back on my belt. Okay, so here we go. I got the marks here. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is on each end of your board, put an X. Okay, it is hopefully everybody's going to know that you're going to have a stud at these two ends, but just go ahead and put one there so there's no confusion. You don't want to have walls that are incomplete because somebody say, oh, well, I didn't see an X there, so I didn't know. All right, so I've done my layout on one of my top plates. At this point right now, since it's a blank wall section, it doesn't really matter what's the top, what's the bottom. But I don't have anything on this plate here. You got two options. One is a slower option. You can stretch your tape back out and you can repeat your layout. Or you can use your speed square to do the job. Now, fun fact, speed squares are 7 inches wide. Why is it 7 inches? Why not 6 inches? Why not 8 inches? Why is it 7? It's 7 inches wide because when you pull two 2x4s together, it lays right across there. In fact, actually this one is a little bit wider, but your standard aluminum and steel speed squares are 7 inches wide. So it stretches past two 2x4s. Remember, 2x4 is 3.5 inches wide. 3.5 plus 3.5 is 7. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure my two ends are flush, meaning they are even. They should not be one sticking out in front of the other. Always make sure that they are even. And once they're even, then I can come back in, bring my square down, and mark a nice line. Again, I'm going to try to make these X's big so y'all can see them with the video here. Okay? Mark my line. X is there. Again, remember, throw some X's on each end here. So now, you can notice I've got my lines, which indicates the side of my stud, where my stud is going to align to, and the X is going to be the side of the line you put this on. So I'm going to cover up my X when I put the stud there, and I'm going to line it up with this line. And both of these, they match. So when I go to stand these up, everything's going to be all hunky-dory. Okay? So this concludes the layout part of this. So here's question number one, is what is that offset measurement? How much do you measure over from your on-center increments? Your 16 to your 24. How far is that? Now, I've said it a bunch of times, so it should be a pretty clear answer. Okay? While you guys are writing that down, I'm going to go ahead and stage up this area so I can build the wall. Okay, let's get you pointed down just a little bit more here. Okay, so I've got my two plates. They are set apart here. They're all laid out. They're good to go. I've got a stack of lumber to my right, and I have already went through and marked the crowns on all of these. And finding the crowns is as simple as laying a board this way, laying it down on the ground, getting over to the end of it. It doesn't really work if you're here. If you're not on the end of the board, it doesn't really work so well. So you get to the end of the board and you look down one corner. You don't try to look down the face of it or the side of it, whatever it may be, but look down just one specific corner. Okay? And if you look down that corner, you usually can tell, does it rise and fall? Does it bow in and out? Or does it twist? Or if it goes back and forth. Definitely if it goes back and forth, throw that on the blocking pile because you're going to need that later. And you don't want it for your framework. So I found there's a very slight rise and fall with this, so I marked my X on here. Now, I went ahead and consulted the plans to figure out the length of my top and bottom plates and the height of my studs. So now you simply will stretch your walls out, the top and bottom plates, to the point where you can fit your studs in between them. Then you come through and you scatter your studs. Now, remember those X's that we had on the plates? Well, you want to match the X's for your crowns. So crowns on the plates, crowns on your studs, they all should go the same direction. Because like I said, once you get this up, if one stud bows this way, one stud bows down, one goes up, one goes up, one goes down. By the time you put the drywall on it, the drywall will conform to those, and you're going to see it. We did some trim work in this one house years ago, and the framers did not really care about their stud crown pattern, and unfortunately, the homeowners, you can see it in the driveway. You can see it clear as day, plain as day, because this particular room was about 50 feet long because it was open. You could just stand up against the wall and you could just look down and you could see the drywall waving in and out. And it looked terrible. So make sure you do this step, okay? This is one of those crucial steps that you may or may not get to. All right, so next thing here, as I said before, I'm going to be using a drill and screws because, as you can see, it's nighttime. My kids are asleep, so I'm not going to be banging away out here with hammers. So I'll be using screws, but you guys would be using 3 or 3 1/4 inch 16 penny hand drive nails or pneumatic framing nails. It just depends on what you're doing. So fastening these together, I'm going to end nail these, which means I'm going to nail through the top and bottom plates into the end of the stud. That's an end nail. So I'm going to be going from the bottom of this straight up in here. With a 2x4 wall, 2 nails are sufficient. Let's say I was framing with 2x6s, you're going to want 3 nails. Okay, so that's what the fastening pattern for this is. There are two nails end nailed at every stud. So it's not just like, okay, we'll put 2 on the end here, put 2 on the end here, and then one screw or 1 nail in the rest of the way. It's 2 at every stud connection that is end nailed in place. Now, some considerations for this. You want to make sure that your studs, everything, are flush on the ends. They match up with their lines. Also, they want them to be flush on the tops here. You don't want to have a jump between the side of your stud to the side of your plate, because it's going to throw off your trim and your drywall, and things just aren't going to look right. So if there is any inconsistency, you're going to have to lift one up or push one down. You might have to play with it to make it work right. Safety concern, when you're doing this, if I have to hold my stud in place, do not hold near the end of the stud, especially if you're using a framing nail gun, because if that nail skews, hit you in the fingers. All right, so I'm going to go through. Now I've got to lift up my plate here just a little bit, get to where it's as flush as possible. One. Okay, so again, 2 screws in every frame here. And forgive the apparent gunshots in the background. I live out near the country, so somebody's out there taking a little target practice. Or maybe they're shooting coyotes. All right, I am going to try to pause this video, and I'm going to work my way along the frame here. So that you guys don't have to sit there and watch me do all these. Now, another point of fact here, when you're fastening this down, if you have a stud that's twisted, get it lined up on one side, and then you can simply twist back the other side and make it work right. Now, if your stud is severely twisted, you might have to add 3 or 4 nails in one end, so the time you go down the other end and you try to untwist that stud, it'll stay on this end. Because sometimes you put 2 nails down here, this one lines up, you go down there, oh, you got to twist it, you nail it down here. but then it moves it out of position when you twist the other side of it. So you might have to sink several nails in here. So let me see if I can pause this video. Like I said, if I can't, you guys can just... Okay, so here we are back again. You can see I've got the whole wall together. And in fact, I can pick it up, everything's fine. So fastened them at the top and bottom plates at every stud connection. So here's my question number 2 for you guys is, what's the fastening pattern? How many screws, and what's the term that we call the way I fasten the stud to the top and bottom plate? So that's question number 2. How many, and what's the location of that screw? Okay, so the wall's framed. You know, at this point here, this wall is done. We can bring it over into location. So at this point, you're going to consult your plans, and specifically, you're going to be looking at your floor plan. And you're going to measure and mark on the subfloor of where that wall is going to sit. So you will measure, like let's say if it was in the, you know, like the center of this wall was 6.5 feet or 6 feet 6 inches from the end of the frame, I would bring it over, make my mark, and then I would usually use a chalk box or a chalk line to put a line on the floor of where it's going to sit, and that way it's going to be right where I want it to be. In our case, this is just going to go on the exterior of this, so it's going to go flush with the edge of the framework here. Now, small wall like this, one person is fine, even if it's, this is only 6 feet tall. If it is an 8-foot wall or 9-foot wall that's fairly short, one person could even do it. Obviously, it's easier. It's going to be easier the more people you have. So take that in consideration as well when you're planning this. So next step in the process, our wall is going to sit flush on the end here, and go down this length, and we'll get it fastened in place. So pick it up. I'm going to carry it down in position. Now, I want to bring y'all a little bit closer to the action, so come with me. Alright, almost got it all set up. Go back just a little bit here. That ought to work, I think. Alright, so I've got my wall in place where I want it to be, and I'm going to have it flush on the front end and flush on the outside end. And fastening this down to the floor is the first step you're going to do. So you're going to fasten through the bottom plate into the subfloor. Now, if everything's done correctly, all your studs will sit over top of a joist. It's what's known as inline framing. We'll talk more about that as this unit progresses. But this also is going to help you so you can run a screw through here and not just hit it into the OSB plywood, but the joists and the header joists and any framework that's below. you should be able to attach to. It's going to make your wall system stronger. So let me grab my drill and get this set up. So again, I'm going to bring it down to a point where it's flush. Bring it out to the point that it's flush there. Now, fastening pattern for this is 2 nails at the base of every stud. And it's not just like 2 nails here and here, or 2 nails kind of in the middle. Like, I'm not saying like this doesn't qualify as 2 nails properly here. Like here and here, that's bogus. But I see that happens. 2 nails at the base of every stud looks more like this. One on the inside of the plate, one on closer to the outside of the plate. So that's this stud. This stud is complete. We'll come on down, and usually you can go every few feet and make sure you're still in line. If you're still in line, fasten it. Put it in place. So now I know that I'm good on the front end, I'm good on the back end. This is a pretty short wall, so it's probably not going to have a lot of movement in the plate. So I'm going to go through and fasten it. If you happen to have a bottom plate that has a lot of crown in it, meaning it's going in and out, work every few feet and push it to the line and fasten it. And the more nails you get in it, the other end's going to be sturdier, so you're able to flex this other end more to get where you need it to be. So again, 2 screws in the base of every stud. A couple more, and we're all set with this portion. Again, I said, all right, so that's the first step in fastening your floors, getting your bottom plate connected and connected properly. The next step is we're going to need to secure this. Right now, this is pretty wobbly. It wobbles this way, and it will wobble even more this way here. And we don't want that, so we're going to have to brace this in place at least temporarily until you get the sheathing on the outside, which is actually your permanent bracing. So we're going to brace this thing temporarily with some of those bent and twisted 2x4s that I was talking about earlier. And what's going to happen with those is we'll get those things set up, and that's going to hold this plumb. Not level, plumb. But to do this, you are going to need a level. So remember, level means flat, horizontal this way. Plumb means vertical. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to lay a diagonal brace across these studs this way, and I'm going to brace it so that it's not going to run back and forth like this. It's not going to wobble. To do that, actually I'm might come like this here. Okay? I'm going to have a stud. And you generally want to get this as high as it can go on the wall, preferably top plate to bottom plate, the way you run it. And you can't do that. Get across as many studs as you can, get as high up as you can. That's going to give it rigidity. Okay, one screw in the top. Then we're going to take a look at the level and see if this works. I am leaning my bubble is to the right, which means my wall is actually leaning to the left, and I've got to move to the right. So you want to follow that bubble. And you want them to be smack in the middle. Okay? And as you fasten this in, you know, depending on how much of a lean and how easy is it to pull, if it's easy to pull, one screw every stud you cross. If it's hard to pull, 2 screws every stud you cross. And one more in the bottom plate for good measure. Okay, now that I have this diagonal brace in, my wall is not going to shift this way anymore. Like, it's sturdy. However, I can still bring it in and out, which is what I'm going to use our second blocking piece of framework here for. Now this one, you can do a couple of things. You could install these on the outside. Okay, just fasten the outside of here, fasten to my sill plate and header joist, rim joist, things like that. And I could put this on the outside. Problem is when you come back later, these braces have to stay up until your OSB sheathing goes on the outside of the walls. Okay, and then you have your all your roof sheathing up. So if you brace on the outside where the sheathing's supposed to go, you're going to have to remove those braces to put the sheathing up. So anytime you can, go on the inside of your studs to make this work. Now, there's usually going to be a wall right here, so you don't want to put your brace where a wall is going to go. So come into the next stud, and again, fasten it near the top with one screw. Okay, when that one screw gets in place, then what you're going to use is something called a cleat. A little piece of blocking that is probably a chunk of leftover cut or even a twisted up board yourself. And this is going to go on the floor. Now, what you're going to do is take your level and see pretty good there. Essentially, what you want to do is just make sure that this cleat catches the bottom of this this brace. Doesn't have to be in a specific spot, just needs to be far enough over to where it's going to catch that brace. That's not going to be an issue. A couple nails or screws in the bottom of it. Straight into the subfloor. I was able to shift that wall the way I wanted it. And I had to actually shift it a little bit. So I'm going to move the 2 screws Now, this wall is braced in two different directions in two different locations, meaning I'm not going to be able to shift it like this. I'm not going to be able to shift it like that. Now, I would and should come back on this end. I brace this, and we're good to go. And that would make it to the point where it is very sufficient, very safe, very easy to work with. But right now, this is just an example piece, just to show you kind of what's happening here. Question number 3 is, why do we put in these braces? What do the braces prevent during the framing process? So this is blank wall section. Now, obviously, it goes a whole lot faster if you're not sitting here jabbering about it, trying to teach people how to do it. This could have been done in 15 minutes if, start to finish, or even less. But walking through the process, this is that for a blank wall section. This is the process for a blank wall section. So, next video, we're going to talk about, I'm going to pull this wall apart, and we will build a wall with a door in it. And then we'll also build a wall with a window in it. And then we'll meet back in with some Zoom videos. We'll talk about other wall framing components, and we'll get more advanced as things roll on here. Okay? So remember, those 3 questions I asked you, write down your answers, take a photo of them, submit them in Canvas, and then you should be all caught up. And if you're missing anything, start getting caught up. I think later this week we're going to find out what kind of grades we're going to have, or the grading policy for missing work and late work. So get yourself caught up quick, because some of these blank spots in the grade book are going to turn into zeros, I think. So you're going to start losing a lot of points. So get logged into Canvas, get your work done, and we'll see you in the next video. Oh, come on. There's the stop button.